Hello, my name is Leo, and welcome to a new tutorial by Blauw Films. Today we're pretty close to finishing off all the planet tutorials on this channel. We are almost at the final one from our solar system. Today we will be looking at Venus, and to be really honest, all these planets kinda do follow the same principles. I do want to tackle a few key points in this one, and then we'll be out of here, and then I'll be uploading a tutorial on Uranus very soon, and then afterwards I'm just going to be doing some tutorials on how to create your own custom planets. Right here on my ArtStation is a Venus render that I did a few days ago, and as you can see, I'm pretty happy with the result that we're getting. It's a pretty believable Venus if you were to down expose it, because Venus, from the few little facts we know, is basically one of the brightest planets in our solar system. It's not really something that you would be getting a clear view of, definitely not to the naked eye and definitely not on a more standard camera setup. We're going to be having a very fast shutter speed, and then we're going to be adjusting the intensity of the sun to give us a clear result that way. And then in case you really want to set the shutter speed back to 1/50 and get a overexposed mess, then that's fully on you and you can do that. So first of all, let's go into Cinema 4D. We'll go over a few things, and it should be fun. We just have the planet over here. There's nothing else in the scene except for a sun, two of our cameras, one which is just a close-up view, and then this wide one we have over here. And inside of our Venus folder, we basically have the planet itself, the clouds as a bottom layer, and then we have an offset layer of clouds as a top layer. They are using the same texture, which maybe I'm cheap, but it kind of does the job most of the times. And then finally we have a atmosphere right on top, just very, very simple stuff. Now what we know about Venus is that it has a radius of 6,051.8 kilometers. Now I don't like to be working within kilometers inside of Cinema 4D because the units just get so astronomically large that it's just almost impossible to move around nicely in the viewport. But I do convert everything to centimeters, and I stick to the number that's written before it. The reason I do that is so in case I need to stick different planets into the same scene setup, at least they are correctly sized relative to each other. I made sure the atmosphere is 6,051.8 centimeters, and then I bracketed each of these other spheres down. So the top layer of clouds has 10 centimeters, or let's say 10 kilometers between the edge of the atmosphere and where the clouds are sitting. And then the bottom layer of clouds has another 30 kilometers in between that. And then the planet is sitting at a simple 6,000 kilometers right underneath. Now, what I have is a material for the planet. And this material, again, is very simple. We just have a Venus texture map. And this could be any Venus texture map that you can find. Ideally something that's a bit on the higher resolution in case you want a close-up or in case you want to make sure that there is some crispy detail in your planet. I found this 8K texture map that I will leave a link for in the description below. I then took a bump map of that texture that I kind of played a little bit around with in Photoshop with just the values, and I slapped that into the glossiness slot over here. We want the planet to be a very opaque matte sphere. I have a Fresnel IOR set to 1.6, which is basically default, and then in the bump we're using the same thing. I'm not using too much of a bump strength over here because most of it is going to be done with a displacement. The bump is really just for adding that extra bit of fine, cheap to calculate detail. Now the displacement, I'm using the bump texture here, but I'm mainly playing with this over here, the minimum level and the maximum level. From a quick Google search, I found that the deepest crater on Venus is about 3 kilometers deep, and the highest mountain on Venus is about 11 kilometers high. And assuming that the bump map or the displacement map you found has accurate height values, then this should be fine. Now, the next thing we have over here is this cloud map. So it's basically a 4K Venus atmosphere. I got this from somewhere else, but because it's just a puffy cloud that's going right on top, it's not that big of an issue. The opacity channel is using a black and white version of that I crunched in Photoshop. You can see it nicely over here. It looks a little bit puffy. It has a nice fall off, so it's pretty cool. The bump channel is using the same thing as well. The displacement is doing the same thing. I'm just giving it a 5 kilometer max radius, super default, but the idea is to fix some kind of depth within these clouds. If you want to go super crazy and you have like a very important close-up detail shot, you could create some procedural volumetric clouds that go all over the planet and then import that as a VDB. The VDB support in Corona Renderer, which I'm using, is not the best at the moment, at least not within Cinema 4D. But I'll soon be making a tutorial on kind of going over that kind of process. I'll probably be looking at Planet Earth for that. Now, the volumetrics tab is really what makes sure that these clouds become more puffy and more atmospheric. And the main important thing is to make sure that you use your main color channel as the scattering color. That will make sure that on every spot of this texture map, the integrity of the colors will stay intact. We have 2 layers over here, one is offset a bit, and then finally we have the atmosphere, which is just a Corona volume material, or if you're using another kind of render engine, whatever volume material you have there. I'm absorbing the blue spectrum of the light, and then we're scattering a texture Fresnel. So you know how Fresnels work, right? From the point of view of the camera, the center of what we're looking at has a different value than the values around it. So we're using this Fresnel over here to have a black and white value in the beginning. Black means that it's not going to appear, so we're able to create that nice fall off right around the edges, and we're avoiding the atmosphere in the center. Because Venus kind of has an atmosphere that's more monochromatic to itself, we are sticking with some of these values over here. I believe I actually color picked some of them and tinted them slightly greener, and then that's what we're using. For the distance, make sure that it's not as big as your planet, but something close to there. So we're using 4,000 here. I believe for planet Earth, when the atmosphere is a bit more prevalent and needs to have a bit more impact on the colors underneath, we were using a shorter distance. I believe for that example, I said about 1/3 of the size of your planet. But for these things like Venus, Mercury, something around the 4,000, something about half or a bit over half would be what you're looking for. Cool. Oh my God, this is going really fast. So, camera settings. One of the main things to look for when you're trying to make planets is the focal length that you're using. Most of the times what we assume to be a realistic look of a planet is mainly based on the compression of the image. So any kind of photographic reference we have ever seen from these faraway planets has been taken from orbit of that planet on a super long lens. And usually they are around 1,200 millimeters to even crazier lenses. What that does is immediately compresses that sphere into almost like a flat looking thing. And yeah, well, there you go. That's kind of the vibe that NASA photography has. I have the shutter speed set to 1,000th of a second, and I have the f-stop set to 10. We're closing down the aperture pretty much all the way just to make sure that we get as much of this planet in focus as possible. And then when it comes to the shutter speed, again, these photographs of these planets, they have to be taken in such a way that allows them to see anything. So usually they are using a super fast shutter speed to make sure that the image is darkened down enough so you can get some detail. I'm keeping the ISO at 200, which is normal, but you could play around with that. Check photographic exposure to make sure it calculates everything. And that's about it. Now here's something that I actually want to ask you guys about. So anyone using Corona Renderer, what do you use with the advanced bokeh effects? Before, I used to use a bokeh center bias of 0.5 and a bokeh vignetting of -1, which gave me some pretty solid results for more moody, eerie kind of things. It kind of darkens down the edges a bit, and I guess it gives a little bit of a strip of brightness right in the middle of the image. But recently I've kind of been moving away from that look, and I've just been sticking to a negative 0.5 anisotropy. But, you know, just let me know what you guys are using. I'm very curious to hear what you can kind of do within the bokeh effects. That's about it. And then we have the sun. So for the sun, here's something important. Because Venus has been made up of 2 different layers of cloud stills sitting onto a plane, we want to have a large size of the sun, because that way the shadows are going to be softer and we're going to have a nice transition between the layers that are basically just flat planes sitting on top of it. If I were to lower this size to 1, which is the classic harsh sunlight, you'll be able to see that we're getting a stepping effect. Right here where the shadow of the sun is supposed to be, we're not actually ending where the light is hitting. It's even going a little bit further over here. That's because we have this stepping effect of these cards, and light is probably even bouncing downwards from one of the other cards that's sitting a bit higher up. To solve that problem, I go for a size of 32. To be honest, because this planet is kind of foggy anyways, it's a believable effect either way. The intensity, I have set that to 5. The way that we kind of figure out what value to use is I set the shutter speed to 1/1000, and then I just play around with the intensity of the sun until we get to a value that looks natural, that looks believable. Once you have that set up, you can then come in and then play around with your shutter speed. So we can go 1/60, and then here you go. You'll see this is kind of the brightness of the planet. It doesn't really matter, even if like maybe you would say, wow, this is completely overexposed, this is completely unusable, but no, it really depends on the shot that you're using, right? Like if you are shooting a scene of someone inside of a space station and it's a human being that you're shooting and they're inside, and then you want to have Venus outside, like right outside of the window, then yeah, just make sure you match the shutter speed of the footage that you're showing. And then this would be a very believable look for Venus. Now, I guess a creative way around it would be to say you have ND'd the glass on the inside of your space station, and that's why you can see Venus at a much lower, at a much dimmer value. But, you know, that's kind of the thing. Just make sure you have some kind of value that you can stick to, where you can set your pole and then work around it. The final thing, when it comes to the sun, I have the temperature set to 6500, which basically just gives it pretty white light. But we can move this down to, let's say, a tungsten light of 3200, and there you go, you have a very orangey look. Or we can even go up to, let's say, something like 8500, and you would have a colder look of the planet. You can either play with the temperature settings of the sun, like, for example, you could stick this to 6500, and then you could go into your camera and then adjust the white balance of that camera. Just think you have to think in reverse here. So if you adjust it to tungsten light, it's going to get bluer because we are making sure that tungsten 3000 is now supposed to be 6500. So you kind of have to bracket it in reverse. It's like compensating. Yeah, that's the word. It's compensating. So if I go to an overcast look, there you go, you're getting more of a orangey look. But yeah, back to 6500. Cool. Now I'm gonna go into After Effects right now and just show you one quick little technique for compositing this thing, and then we're out of here. And then we can move on to the final planet tutorial in this series. I rendered this really crazy spinning shot of the planet. It's not going to be for our film, it's not going to be for anything, just kind of for fun. But one of the things that makes planets look more believable is when you have this little bit of a blurry edge right around the planet. It kind of just showing that the planet is so massive that the camera is never able to completely get the entire thing in focus. Now, the way to do that is super simple. I'm just going to drag this thing into a new composition, and we are going to be creating 2 black solids. Duplicate one, and now we're going to make a duplicate of our Venus footage. Drag one of the black solids in between it, and the bottom one is just for a background, and this is going to be our main one. And then what we're going to be doing right on top is creating a Luma mask that's going to be affecting our camera lens blur effect. So on this Venus effect, go to Generate Fill, and we'll make that white. And now duplicate this layer and change the color to black. And as you can see, we've already created a halo effect. Now to expand on that halo effect, take the black fill layer and go to Blur and Sharpen, Gaussian Blur. You don't have to check repeat edge pixels because we're not edging any of the corners, and we can just increase the blurriness. And as you can see, what it does, it creates almost like a atmosphere effect. It basically creates the Fresnel effect that we were doing in Cinema 4D. So a value of around 60 works nicely. Now copy that Gaussian blur and paste it right in here. There you go. Now you can lower the value of the external ring to make sure that if you have stars or anything behind it, it's not really going to be affecting it. So something like that is fine. I'm going to be adding a new adjustment layer to the top with a color correction exposure that I'm going to be boosting up. Now, what you want to do is you don't want to go like crunching it completely. You want to make sure that you start creating some white values, but you still have a nice fall off. Something like that is okay. Select all four and Command Shift C to pre-compose. Hit OK, rename that Luma, and we can turn that off. The next thing is add your adjustment layer with a camera lens blur effect, which I find to be the more natural way of doing this. And here we can change the aspect ratio to be 0.5, which matches what we did inside of Cinema 4D. Now the blur map here, change the layer to Luma. Now just decrease the blur radius as fit. So something like value of 2 or maybe even a value of 3. That looks fine. That looks good. Just make sure you have some photographic reference next to it and you'll be fine. There you go. Now the final thing you can do is just add one more adjustment layer to do your crazy color corrections. You can like increase the vibrance a bit. I don't know, add a tritone effect to create a little bit of a filmic processing look. Something like this. And then increase the blend. Yeah, there you go. So we went from this thing to this thing. The difference is so subtle that if I keep flicking through it, you can see the difference. But if not, you know, you probably won't. But it's cool. It's cool. It works. It works when you put it in a scene. And yeah, that's about it. Now, the final thing you can do, and then I'm really going to be shutting up about it, you can grab some star plates and put it behind it. Just like scale it down, make it 3D, push it down in Z space. There you go. You have some stars over there. You would probably not be seeing the stars, and that's kind of the thing. So I'm just going to be masking out some of these with a rough mask. And I'm gonna be exposing them up and crunching them down a bit. Now that's cool. And now I'm gonna make a duplicate and remove the exposure. Now from this one, I'm just gonna be removing some of these mask points. There you go. Now, just saying that, you know, some of these stars here in the far brightness are just as bright as our Venus is, so they're showing up, but most of the stars are not going to be showing up in this shot. Simply due to the way that we have set up our camera settings, we would not be able to see any stars. Well, and that's about it. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. I apologize for the lack of uploads in the past month. It's just trying to figure out some of these things, really trying to make sure that Syntactic Labyrinths or sci-fi film gets as best as possible and comes out hopefully pretty soon. Let's make it happen soon. So really been focusing on that. But there's some cool stuff coming out soon. I kind of figure out my schedule a bit better. Thank you very much for watching. Thanks a lot for the support. Be sure to hit subscribe if you want to check out any future content. I promise it's not only going to be planet stuff. It's not only going to be planet stuff. There's some other cool stuff coming up. So yeah, cheers. Have a great night. Bye-bye.